Welcome back to the How to Do It series, and we're talking about 10 2-minute tips, and we're talking about for the time starved, for many of us so desperate to find time when we need fast, immediate things. And so we're talking about simple little things we can do that can change our health, our life, and our longevity, and our happiness, hopefully. So we're going to talk about our daily bread. We're going to talk about a 2-minute strategy that can really, really change this story of bread and the negative story of bread. And I'm going to talk about that negative story because bread is our most popular food in the Western world. And it's kind of a perfect example of this senseless denaturing of our diet. The reality is, we'll talk about the denaturing side of it shortly, but the reality is most of us wildly overconsume cereal grains. We were never designed to have our cereal for breakfast, our piece of toast, our biscuit for morning tea, our sandwich or roll at lunchtime, our afternoon tea, our pasta, whatever. It's wheat on wheat on wheat, or it's cereal grain on cereal grain. And there's nothing wrong with cereal grains, that we just weren't supposed to eat that much of them. And a standard recommendation amongst many of the integrative physicians that I work with is to just, if you've got inflammatory issues and they're chronic and you can't fix them, is just drop bread and breakfast cereals for 3 months and see what happens. And this is something that some of them have tried. And what they report is that the results are very often life-changing. Maybe you try it yourself if you've got inflammatory issues or, chronic conditions that you simply can't shake off. It reminds me when we talk about this bastardization of a primary food source. I remember being at an Acres USA conference, and the wonderful Charles Walters, who's the founder of Acres USA, and of course the editor of the Acres magazine, and the co-writer of many important works in regenerative agriculture, what he used to call eco-agriculture. Charles did a little speech. He said, "We're about to say the Lord's Prayer. My version of it: give us this day our daily calcium propionate, our sodium diacetate monoglyceride, our potassium bromide, our calcium phosphate monobasic, aluminium potassium sulfate, chloramine T, sodium benzoate, butylated hydroxyanisole, monoisopropyl citrate, synthetic vitamins A and D, and genetically modified soy flour. And forgive us, dear Lord, for calling this stuff bread." Of course, that was his wonderful description of how absurd it's got, and a really, really good argument to bake your own bread. And this is the 2-minute story. It literally is 2 minutes, and I'll demonstrate later. You can make a simple 2-minute, or you can do a more complex, but it's only 2 minutes to set it up in a bread maker, add the ingredients, push the button, 6 o'clock in the morning, boom, 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 you start beating the dough, and you awaken to that delicious smell of freshly baked bread, which ranks in maybe the top 5 smells on the planet, in my opinion. So let's talk about 6 reasons to bake your own bread. Now, let's talk about something called an anti-nutrient. What is an anti-nutrient? Well, to give you a description of them, white flour, white bread, which is 89% of bread sold in this country still, and so many people, including adults, and it surprises me, only will eat white bread. They only like that texture. But when you take wholemeal and convert it to white flour and make white bread, it's 80% of the nutritional value has been lost. And what you've created is something you still have to digest. Digestion is a really energy-intensive process, and it takes nutrition to digest. And when you've got so little nutrition in that white bread you send your kids off to school with, there's actually a net loss. That's what an anti-nutrient is. By the time you've finished processing it and utilize minerals to process it, there's actually a net loss at the end of it, where you're eating something that's pulling nutrition from your body. And that's not a good thing for a generation of children who are living less than us. Now, every generation's lived older than the previous generation, and now we've got kids going backwards with what's called progressive degeneration. Please take them off the white bread. In my opinion, it should be banned. Number two, when we talk about 6 reasons to bake your own bread, is this what the flour is and where it came from. Now, Norman Borlaug, of course, he won his Nobel Prize for creating the Green Revolution. What was that about? Well, we had, I think it was 27% lodging of 1 year, because climate change has been happening for decades. It's just getting worse now. We had wheat falling over. The original open pollinated varieties were being blown over, and that's called lodging, and you can't harvest it, and that's a serious condition. So the idea was that the people who had expertise in hybridisation were asked, can you create a smaller, at least as abundant plant that won't fall over? And Norman was one of those hybridising experts, but he actually cheated. I'm saying he did, and many people will be controversial about that, or consider that controversial, but he did, because he irradiated, instead of the standard process of hybridisation, he irradiated some wheat and he took out a mutant that was a smaller, at least as abundant plant, and that became our primary food source across the globe. And that mutant, we weren't told and should have been, takes up 50% less iron than the original varieties of wheat, 32% less calcium, 31% less magnesium, low 20s for the trace minerals. But one trace mineral it doesn't uptake at all, and that trace mineral is cobalt. And you can say, oh, big deal, cobalt, that's nothing. Well, cobalt is something. Cobalt is your B12, and B12 is your energy, amongst many other things that B12 does. And your primary source of B12 was cereal grain, typically, and now it's not. So many people have sort of subclinical B12 deficiency based upon something that Norman should have got a kick up the arse rather than the Nobel Prize. Like I said, that's controversial, but it's a fact. Number three, in terms of our reasons to make our own, is the soy flour folly. We're talking about most of those cheap white loaves that you're buying from the supermarket for $3 or $4. Check the label. You'll find that the second ingredient, and it actually involves 30% in many instances of that loaf, is imported soy flour from the US, and it's Roundup Ready soy flour. It's genetically modified soy flour, or soy, that has had often 3 sprays of glyphosate. And we know now that glyphosate's a carcinogen. We do not want our children going to school with something that's been sprayed 3 times with the carcinogen, and that's what the soy flour is, and that's what it contains. And do not look at the labels, become a label Nazi. You can think, oh, no one's going to do that. Yes, they are. So we've reached a point where you've got to recognise you're in charge of your own health and your family's health. The government's not going to do it. The multinationals not going to do it. You are in charge, and there isn't anyone looking after you, and you shouldn't be eating soy flour, but you are, because no one's looking after you. So you've got to take care of yourself. So, of course, glyphosate, it's been linked to autism, to Alzheimer's, to autoimmune diseases, to kidney and liver failure, and now, of course, the World Health Organization have suggested it's a carcinogen. So we don't want to be eating that in our bread, for God's sake. Compromised core minerals and precious enzymes, the next story. So the biggest deficiencies in the Western world are magnesium and zinc, and bread contains a natural acid. If we overconsume a little bit, so it's not a problem, but a natural acid called phytic acid, which forms a zinc phytate and a magnesium phytate, and you excrete those. Now, soy flour has particularly high levels of phytic acid, much higher than wheat flour, but both of them are an issue. And there's a secondary issue. Both soy and wheat are what are called, all cereal grains and legumes are called enzyme inhibitors. And of course, you've only got a limited number of enzymes. You don't really want to inhibit them and have to overtax your pancreas and liver to compensate for that inhibition. So how do you avoid that? Should you not eat bread at all? You eat sourdough bread. That's the secret of sourdough. And there's a third secret to sourdough. Sourdough removes the phytic acid. The sourdough process removes the enzyme inhibitors. And there's one other issue, something called lectins, which is super inflammatory in fact. But there are other lectins found, and all of those are neutralized during the sourdough process. So it really is the way to eat bread. And of course, it's been partially digested, and the organisms have done their work. And instead of you doing the work and digesting that bread, so it's a wonderful outcome. Now, the other story is this issue, because we consume so many of these cereal grains, about acid-alkaline balance. This finding that most cancer patients are acidic, that we need to maintain the 6.4 urine pH to be well balanced from an acid-alkaline balance, and it's linked to disease and a lack of resilience if we're super acidic, for example. And many, many people have got acidic saliva and acidic urine. Get yourself a pH strip and check at some point. So one of the things linked to that acidity epidemic is that overconsumption of refined carbohydrates. And bread's kind of a triple whammy because it's, wheat is really acid forming. It also ties up magnesium, which magnesium, of course, is quite alkalizing in the body. And magnesium helps us to relax. And so then we get this stress, actually increases acidity, and the lack of magnesium then builds our stress. And so it becomes a bit of a revolving hamster wheel, perhaps, that we want to get off of. So that's, yet another reason to look at this concept. So we're going to teach you how to make, in 2 minutes, a simple spelt bread, or even better, a sourdough spelt bread. And we're going to give you the recipe, and we're going to demonstrate how to do that next. We talked all about the 6 reasons just a few moments ago, the 6 reasons why it would be a good idea to bake your own bread. And we're going to teach you a simple, because it's about 2 minutes, a very simple recipe to do a standard loaf, but an even more important recipe we're going to teach you and demonstrate the concept of making your own lacto-fermented bread. So we're talking about a sourdough bread, but we're talking about a sourdough bread with a little bit of difference, because we're going to use the probiotic BioBubble, and we're going to make a BioBubble bread, which is, BioBubble is going to be the base. And it comes out beautiful because, this huge, vast, diverse range of probiotic organisms go to work in that 12-hour, that 24-hour period, working on breaking down all of and it brings out all the sugars from the grains, all of the sweetness, and it's just a very, very nice bread, and a probiotic bread. Certainly, the inner parts that haven't had the heat will even retain a few of the organisms. So, wonderful concept that well, first of all, we'll talk about the simple one. And what we'll talk about is what grain to use. And we talked about the issue of acidification and how many of us are acid. And we talked about our overconsumption of cereal grains. And it's really important to understand that wheat flour is very, very acid forming. Now, there's an option, and it's a much better option. And of course, it's the non-hybridized, quite old grain called spelt. Now, spelt is actually not the only, I think millet qualifies as well, but spelt is the big alkalizing grain. So the negatives of conventional bread are gone when you're using spelt. So we're going to talk about a simple recipe. So we're talking 2 cups. This is the 2 minutes. So you scoop up your 2 cups, 500 grams of wholemeal or white. I'll just do one of each. It gives a nicer texture. So white and 1 wholemeal spelt flour, half a teaspoon of salt. Now, we'll talk about salt in a moment and talk about you might as well use the good salt. A teaspoon of quick yeast. So we've got some quick yeast present here somewhere. This is just a simple little supermarket yeast. So a teaspoon of that, 300 mils of warm water, a teaspoon of honey. So we've got, of course, if we're going to use honey, we might also use the Nutrition Farms organic from this rainforest farm here. It's beautiful honey. That's Nutrition Farms honey. We're going to use a teaspoon of that. And a teaspoon of vegetable oil, and of course we'll just use an organic olive oil. So very simple. You just basically putting them into the bread maker. There's the bread maker here, and we've got a container, and we just put our 2 cups, 1 cup of wholemeal, 1 cup of white spelt flour. We can buy that from all the health food shops. Half a teaspoon of the good salt, a teaspoon of quick yeast, a teaspoon of honey, Nutrition Farms honey preferably, 300 mils of warm water, and a teaspoon of vegetable oil, and that's it. You just put it in there, and you push the button, and it set your timer. That's 2 minutes to put those ingredients in. Literally, is a 2-minute process. But what we're going to teach you is this much more special sourdough version using BioBubble. So we're going to talk about BioBubble bread, which of course is low phytic acid, low enzyme inhibitors because they're consumed, and low lectins, which is the 3 things that you're going to avoid when you use lacto-fermentation or the sourdough process. So we're going to begin. It's going to be a decent sized loaf. We're going to do 3 cups of spelt flour. We might do, we'll do 3 cups of wholemeal. We'll do that right now. This is a big loaf. And we might feed everyone at Nutritech with this as a special treat once it's done. So the non-alkalizing spelt bread, 3 cups, and this is a bit more than 250 grams, so I won't make it a full cup. It's going to be too big. 1, 2, 3. That's our 3 cups of wholemeal. And then we have a little touch. It's just for texture, really, because the white flour just gives it that slightly nicer texture. We're only doing 1, so it's 3 to 1. We're going to do a cup of white flour. That's it. So that's the flour component. And now we look at the sort of all the extras. So we're going to have our teaspoon of salt. Now, if we're using salt, you've got to try the salt. I was in India. I was reading some Ayurvedic papers. I'm always reading papers, just seeing what's going on. And I was looking at their Ayurvedic traditional sort of herbal strategy they've used for thousands of years. And they use one salt from one mountain range called the Indupu mountain range, and it's used in 23 Ayurvedic preparations. I thought, gee, this must be special salt. So I brought some back, tested it, and it's got all 74 minerals in it. It's become a real favourite amongst chefs and amongst anyone who likes the flavour of good quality salt. The salt becomes sort of medicinal. So we're going to use that one. I mean, you can use any good salt, not an iodide, not a bastardized salt where you've stripped all the minerals out, but a mountain salt or a sea salt. So we're going to use 1.5 teaspoons of salt. I quite like salt, so I'll put with this nice medicinal salt, I'll put a little more. Yeah, about 1.5. There's our salt. And then we're going to look at a tablespoon of honey. So we've got our beautiful Nutrition Farms honey. And we're going to take our tablespoon, heaped tablespoon, and we'll drizzle that over it. Beautiful stuff, this. If you're a honey fan, you've got to taste. In fact, I'm going to have what's left on that spoon. Oh, yum. It is something special about rainforest honey. Raw honey, of course. Now let's look at what else we've got. Our tablespoon. 3 to 4 tablespoons to be exact. So we've got 4 tablespoons of olive oil. So we're using organic olive oil. That's 1, 2, 3, and that's our 4 tablespoons of olive oil. And we're going to use some seeds. Now, 2 tablespoons of each. We might have even 3, because what you can use is ideally, and we couldn't source them for this, but this is what we normally would do. We just couldn't go out. We went out to the shop today to buy some of these ingredients. Sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, poppy seeds, and pepitas. And so what we managed to get was some sunflower and pumpkin seeds. Of course, this very high source of zinc from the pumpkin seed. So we're going to put our couple of tablespoons in that. And so I'm going to guess a couple of tablespoons, and that's about that. And we're going to put our pumpkin seeds. I can't use my tablespoon now because it's got honey all over it. And that's the pumpkin seeds at about 2 tablespoons. So rough as guts, but that works. Now we're going to add the special ingredient, the most special ingredient, which of course, I'll just get a glass here. We're going to add our glass of BioBubble. Remember, this, I'm arguing, the best probiotic in the world, but because I helped develop it, but we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of organisms and billions per mil. So we're going to have a whole glass of this, and this is what this is going to be. You can see it bubbling there, because that's the CO2 from the billions of organisms present in there. So we're going to put a whole glass of BioBubble into this bread. And then finally, a glass of untreated water. So we've just got some tank water from the tank here at the farm, and we're going to put our glass of untreated water in. So that's our mix. Remember, 3 cups of wholemeal, 1 cup of white spelt flour, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, a large tablespoon of honey, 3 to 4 tablespoons of olive oil. We might put this recipe underneath and supply it with this particular session. A couple of tablespoons each of, in this case, sunflower and pumpkin seeds, a glass of BioBubble, which we've just done, and a glass of untreated rainwater. And so we've got our little mix. We'll just give it a little bit of a stir, although it's not necessary. Well, it is, because we might as well mix it in a bit. And then we're going to add that mix into our bread maker. And basically, the concept is put it on the dough setting, which is about 14 minutes of where it's going to really combine all those ingredients. And then basically, we can either leave it in the bread, but this is where we've got to leave it for our curing time, this 24-hour fermenting process. and you can put that in a bowl or whatever, and then you can either bake it in here at the finish of that process after it's cured, or you can put it into a baking dish and bake it. We're going to put it into the bread maker. And we're going to, and off screen, we'll turn on the dough section, the 14 minutes of where it'll get beaten up and set. And then we might pull it out into a baking dish, and we might need it a couple of times. But that's basically, and then we're going to bake it. And the baking period is 190 degrees centigrade for 1 hour and 10 minutes. So we're going to have the 24-hour curing process where BioBubble is going to get in and break down everything and take the negatives. Remember, the phytic acid, the enzyme inhibitors, and the lectins will be removed. The BioBubble will draw out a lot of the goodies and the flavors, and you'll have this wonderful probiotic bread called BioBubble bread. Thank you.